Are you seeing me right now through that monitor in front of you? The answer is yes or no, and if you can't choose, you can't perceive me. You don't know whether I'm here or not. 1 or 0, yes or no. Binary logic is something you depend on. Without it, you can't have so much as a single perception. If we can base insight to God on binary logic, we've got it made. We don't need faith anymore. It's extraneous, irrelevant.
And hence my theory of reality, CTMU.
You have the universe. The universe is closed. It is one unary entity. That's your primary quantum. Okay? But now everything, it's got to be self-composed because there's nothing external of which it can be composed.
It is completely self-contained. In other words, it's undefined from the perspective of anything outside it. As a matter of fact, there is no outside perspective, which makes it undefined. This external non-definition, right? It's got to define itself completely internally. And this amounts to freedom. It is externally unconstrained. All of its constraint comes from within. It's self-determined, and that includes the power to self-configure, which the universe has because there's nothing external to configure it. Anything external to reality is irrelevant to reality, and you might as well not even talk about it. So it's the first requirement of discourse. Now the universe is composed only of itself. There's nothing else but the universe, but the identity of the universe to comprise the universe.
You've got one unified identity, but it is self-dual. It consists of both mental and physical aspects. They are unified from the top down. Basically, reality self-distributes and self-differentiates from the top down. Ontology and epistemology are coupled in this theory. Reality actually has to recognize itself and process itself. It has to do both. But it's self-duality. It's two things coinciding in one and the same substrate. Right? And it couples ontology and epistemology. Those are usually thought of as being separate philosophical disciplines. But I couple them for the simple reason that an attribution of existence requires knowledge of the argument of that attribution. If you're going to have a function that attributes existence to something, then you have to know what you're attributing it to. So obviously there is no such thing as a separation of ontology and epistemology. If you take a state, it consists of attributes and values for the attributes. You can't take those two things apart. What I'm saying is they're metaphorically coupled. All right, you can deal with pure attributes, but you can't do that without instances, or at any rate, a cognitive identity operator to actually perform the mental functions involved, right? So there's no way, and as far as the values are concerned, you take an object without attributes, that's an oxymoron, okay? There is no object that is totally without attributes. You've pinned an attribute on it by calling it an object, okay? So you can't take those two things apart. There's simply no way to do it. All right, obviously the two are coupled or related. The CTMU takes those things, couples them, and then seeks the basic fundamental model of what those things are and how they get coupled. And in so doing, it comes up with an identity, something that distributes over everything in reality. And then it quantizes reality in terms of that identity, so that everything stays homogeneous and coherent and unified. In my system, in my system of metaphysics, telesis is primary, will is primary, and then it factorizes itself. It actually fractionates or factors itself into two sides of representation, which is the sign and the thing signified by it. Okay, plus something called thirdness, which of course is the interpreter of the sign. And all of these things, three things, are combined in the CTMU, in the metaformal system, by something called triality, which means that any object can be regarded as a relation or an operation or a process. You can take all of those things and everywhere combine them. Basically say that cognition is akin to a cognitive identity language. It allows us to identify things. So it's a language. Then we say the physical universe is a manifold. Okay, we've got a space-time manifold out there in which things are happening. The idea then is to connect these two things. That takes a kind of meta language that spans both of these two object languages that we have, one of which deals with values, coordinate systems, and things like that. That's the manifold. And then you've got the other side, which is qualitative, more attributive, right? That's the mental side. So we're uniting those two things in one metaformal language that has to be quantized in a certain way. And those identity operators that I was just talking about, that are a little bit like computational acceptors, those are the quanta. Okay, they're active signs. If you look at the linguistic aspect of what I'm talking about, they are active signs in the language, but they are also the points of the manifold or the universe that contains the content to which you refer with the language.
Well, it plays a very central role. Information is attribution or communication, right? You start with a potential, and then you narrow that down to a subregion of that potential. In other words, you're creating an instance of the original potential, and that is just an attribution. It's akin to when you apply a quality or a property to an object, right? Which actually occurs from the top down in the CTMU, but we'll just set that aside for now. That information is thus a mapping. It has to be understood as something that is tripartite. You've got a source of the mapping, then you've got a target of the mapping, and then you've got the mapping between one and the other, which spans both of them. All right, and that's CTMU triality once again. Now, what is the vehicle of information? The vehicle of information is uniformly always language. All right, that's the mathematical structure that in terms of which information is always defined. So that's why, in order to be information, in order to be regarded as information, language has to be the structure of reality.
You can look at reality, external reality, as a language. You're looking at it. Language is, as I say, the most general algebraic structure there is. And to see that, any other algebraic structure you can name is a language. When you write it down, you are writing it down in the form of language. So automatically, you know language is the most general algebraic structure.
A lot of people think that, well, language is simply something that we speak that comes out of your mouth. It's not. It's an algebraic structure. It actually has elements of operations, and it's a form of algebra. But it's a very general form of algebra because anything that we can think about and formulate obviously is a language. It's got to conform to the rules of language, otherwise it's unintelligible. So in a sense, language is the most general algebraic structure. Therefore, when we talk about the most likely algebraic structure to apply to the universe as a whole, it's definitely got to be language because that's the most general. In other words, reality has to be a language, and this goes together with bringing all three of those ingredients, language, universe, and model, together. Obviously, the structure of each is a part of the whole, characterizes the whole distributively.
It's a language that is at once its own universe and its own model.
The syntax is intrinsic. If you take a look at a language, those are the absolute invariants that every intelligible statement is made from. A language that is quantized not in terms of signs, but in terms of syntactors and identification events. It has both a subjective and objective aspect. That's what syntactors and tellors, or syntactic identification operators and telic identification operators, are in the CTMU. View reality in terms of identification events involving syntactors.
That syntax is implanted in those syntactors. Telecausation comes from us, see, because we're tellers. That's what observer participation is. The tertiary syntactor is a point that is located. It's a tertiary point in the primary point that is the cosmos itself. That's reality. Reality is a primary syntactor.
So the language that comes out of this ultimate language, the metaformal system, it can be characterized as a language that talks to itself, about itself, for its own purposes, which are logical and experiential self-identification. Okay? So you've got this closed language, this high-level, ultimate kind of language. Triality can be looked at in a couple of other ways as well, as basically the coincidence of space, time, and object. All of those things are everywhere combined. It can also be looked at as the combination of language, universe, and model. Cognitive theory is a language, okay? Model is a model, and universe is a universe, which means that it serves as its own object, its own relation, a relational structure, and its own operational structure. Okay, it is at once an object, a relation, and an operator. That's what triality is. Okay, you've got those three things, and those three things all have to be combined in every identity in reality. And every identity in reality is a coherent image of the global identity, which is the global operator descriptor.
A distributed identity for the universe, a cohesive principle that covers the universe and supports these phenomena, and that would be God. It's the highest attribute, the attribute that distributes over all of reality.
We can treat the identity of reality as God, and then we can derive its properties. Now, the question then arises, are these properties the same as those which are usually cited as properties of God in various definitions of God existing in various religions? And the answer is yes. God is the identity of reality, or to put it another way, God is ultimate reality. Define him any other way, and basically you are out of sync with the way any religion defines God. So basically what we're looking for is a definition of God, that satisfies all religions because it possesses properties that are common to all of them. That's what this definition of God that I'm talking about is.
Basically, that constitutes a kind of identity, and everything in the system is an image of that identity, and that includes us.
The identity of reality, or ultimate reality.
As a matter of fact, the universe, the entire universe, is a mind.
The universe, at its moment of its inception, it has to potentialize, actually has to generate a potential for itself. In that potential, it is an actualization that is complemented, it has a logical complement, that which it is not.
You've somehow got to map the mathematics into reality. Reality has to model the mathematics and vice versa.
The universe has a property called mathematical closure, so it contains all of its own energy, all of its own information. Everything is conserved and recycled, and yet it is transformed and changed in the process.
All of the physical things that happen are basically outcomes of logical structure.
You get logico-geometric duality. If you're logico-geometric, it's right there in the name. Logic is being coupled with geometry. They're dual to each other. Okay? Therefore, you've got a self-duality when you couple those two things in every quantum of reality. So it has to map itself internally by descriptive endomorphism or de-endomorphism to tertiary syntactors, and then those tertiary syntactors can agglomerate, can come together in organisms. Primary syntax is internally replicated inside each syntactor. And some syntactors, for example, secondary syntactors like us, have great internal complexity that allows us to model global syntax.
Faith is dead. People no longer have faith in anything. So we're going to have to make logic do where faith once stood.
A world of pure mind?
Yes, we can call the universe, for want of a better term, the mind of God. God is the principle of consistency, the principle of cohesion that holds the universe together. We're all little pieces of God. We're all one.